She vanished in broad daylight, just steps away from the busiest part of town, and no one saw a thing. That's what makes the disappearance of Elizabeth Elena Laguna-Salgado one of the strangest mysteries in Utah's history. It didn't happen deep in the woods or in the middle of the night, but on a quiet street, just after class, in the heart of a crowded college town. Elizabeth was 26 years old, walking home like she always did. The route was less than a kilometer. And yet somewhere between point A and point B, she vanished. Completely. No cameras, no screams, no trace. For the next 3 years, her family lived in limbo. At times, it felt like hope was gone. Until one early spring day, when a group of campers exploring Hobble Creek Canyon, a remote mountain area nearly 30 miles from where she disappeared, stopped in front of a strange mound of earth. What they found buried beneath was the beginning of a mystery even deeper than her disappearance. Elizabeth Elena Laguna-Salgado was born in Chiapas, a southern Mexican state her family once described as the place where we were born, but where no future existed. She was the middle child of 3 sisters, and even as a young girl, Elizabeth stood out. Serious, hardworking, with eyes that always seemed to be thinking a few steps ahead of everyone else. In 2014, after spending time on missionary work in remote areas, she moved to Provo, Utah, a small yet lively city, home to Brigham Young University and a large Latter-day Saint community. Elizabeth enrolled at the Nomen Global Language Center, a school that specialized in teaching English to international students. She rented a modest room just a few blocks from campus, a 10-minute walk each way. Every day, she carried a small backpack packed with books, a lunchbox, and her red journal. Though she'd only been in the U.S. for less than 3 weeks, Elizabeth messaged her family constantly, morning, noon, and night. She often video called her mom to show off a new American dish she'd tried, or to share something funny that had happened in class. "I feel very peaceful here," she told her father the night before she vanished. It was springtime in Provo. The snow was melting, the sun was out, and students were trickling back to class after break. It felt safe, predictable. The kind of place where no one would expect danger to find someone like Elizabeth, a young woman with a steady routine and no known enemies. She didn't date. She didn't party. She had no conflicts with anyone. Her roommates described her as so quiet she was almost invisible. But maybe that invisibility was exactly why no one noticed, until it was too late. There was one thing even her family didn't know about her, and that detail might just be the first real clue to unlocking what happened. That Thursday, April 16th, 2015, started out like any other. Elizabeth had just finished her English class around 1:30 p.m. Her classmates remembered her wearing a light gray jacket, her hair pulled back low, carrying the same small black backpack she always did. One student said she smiled and waved goodbye before walking out the doors of the language center, blending into the foot traffic along 500 West, a street lined with international student housing. The walk back to her apartment should have taken less than 10 minutes. But here's where things turn strange. Not a single person, not her friends, roommates, or neighbors, saw her after she stepped outside that school. When Elizabeth didn't call home that afternoon, something she always did, her family back in Mexico grew concerned. By that evening, with multiple texts going unanswered, her parents reached out to relatives living in the U.S. Calls were made to the school, to the landlord, but everyone said the same thing. She left class. No one's seen her since. Police were contacted the next day, but from the very beginning, the investigation hit a wall. There was no surveillance footage of Elizabeth anywhere on her route home. Despite being a populated area, not one camera, not from a store, not at the bus stop, not at the busy intersection near her apartment, captured her image. Inside her room, nothing seemed out of place. Her phone, wallet, passport, all gone. But there were no signs of a struggle. Her bed was neatly made. A finished lunch container sat in the sink. Only one thing was missing: the red journal she always kept at the corner of her desk. Neighbors said they hadn't heard anything unusual. One person thought they saw Elizabeth that morning, but wasn't sure. "There's a lot of international students around here. They kind of look alike from far away," the person said. Her family flew to Utah almost immediately. Her parents brought photos, paperwork, and one unshakable belief: Elizabeth would never leave on her own. She had no reason to. She'd only been in the U.S. for 3 weeks, just beginning to settle in. To the media, it was a rare case, A young woman disappears in broad daylight in a busy neighborhood with no history of conflict, no mental health issues, and no known threats. But it was the silence, no clues, no witnesses, that haunted everyone the most. If she was walking home like she always did, then why did no one see her? And if she never made it home, what could have happened in just those few short minutes? By the time her family arrived in Provo, police had launched an official search. But because Elizabeth was an adult and a foreign national, the case wasn't considered urgent by legal standards. Early theories suggested maybe she left voluntarily, maybe a short trip, maybe a secret relationship, but her parents rejected that entirely. Elizabeth was cautious, responsible. She never went a day without calling home. She had no boyfriend in the US, no close friends to run off with. She didn't even own a car. The family started printing flyers, plastering them across gas stations, libraries, churches, grocery stores, anywhere Elizabeth might have gone. Spontaneous search groups formed. Volunteers walked city streets, alleys, parks, even wooded areas. Strangers showed up to help, moved by the sheer oddness of the case. But still, no one, not a single person, saw Elizabeth after she walked out of that school. No camera, no eyewitness, no trace. Police pulled her bank records and phone data. Her account showed no activity after April 16th. Her phone had gone dark, powered off sometime that afternoon. They checked traffic cams, hospitals, bus terminals, but she didn't appear anywhere. Theories began to swirl. Was someone watching her? Had someone learned her routine and waited for the perfect moment to strike? Or was this a random act, someone seizing an opportunity in broad daylight? Rumors started spreading. Some claimed she ran away. Others speculated about religious pressure. Still others brought up human trafficking, a known issue in the area, though no evidence supported that. Frustrated by the lack of progress, her family reached out to the FBI. But with no signs of a crime, it remained a missing person case, not enough to trigger a federal investigation. A week passed, then a month, then 3. Elizabeth was still gone. But if that's true, why was the phone at home? Yes, 1 week after her disappearance, police conducted a more thorough search of her apartment and found her phone. It was fully charged, turned off, tucked inside her nightstand. No unfamiliar fingerprints. No final message. Just one new question, the one no one's ever answered. If she didn't take her phone, then who was the last person to see her, and why? When the investigation stalled, Elizabeth's family decided to do what the police hadn't: speak directly with everyone who had last seen her. They met with classmates, teachers, roommates, and neighbors, and slowly, a more complicated picture began to take shape. One classmate, a young woman named Mayuko, recalled that Elizabeth had mentioned a man, seemed older, she said, who often waited outside the school around dismissal time. She said he was polite, but asked a lot of personal questions, Mayuko remembered. Pressed for details, she couldn't recall the man's face, only that he drove a dark green SUV and had an unusual accent. But police couldn't verify the lead. There were no cameras in that area, and no one else remembered the vehicle. Another roommate, Amanda, shared something else. About a week before Elizabeth vanished, she heard her crying in her room. When she knocked to ask if everything was okay, Elizabeth just said, "I miss my mom," then fell silent. But Amanda added, "Something didn't feel right. I heard her speaking Spanish on the phone, and her tone, it was tense." The family pushed for phone records to be checked, and sure enough, that night there had been a nearly 18-minute call to an unregistered number. It was a prepaid phone bought from a store 3 hours away, near the Nevada border. There was no way to trace the owner. At the same time, another neighbor, Mr. John, who lived just 2 doors down, said he once saw Elizabeth standing at the front of the house, speaking with a tall Latino man. "I couldn't hear much, but she looked stressed, backpack in hand, like she was heading out somewhere." He couldn't recall the exact date, but that detail lined up with other reports that Elizabeth had begun carrying her backpack even in the evenings, which wasn't typical for her. The family started to wonder, was she planning to go somewhere? Was someone pressuring her? Or was she hiding something she never told anyone? Then came the detail that would change how everyone looked at the case. A Brazilian student, who had been in the same class as Elizabeth, quietly dropped out of school just 1 week after she vanished. He didn't withdraw officially, didn't collect his transcripts. No one knew where he went. Until now, we've told this story through the eyes of Elizabeth's family, those who loved her. But now, let's rewind and look again through the voice of someone who never spoke up, not for the first 3 years. Her name is Lorraine, a quiet woman who lived alone in the ground floor unit of the same building Elizabeth stayed in. When contacted by a documentary crew in 2018, she agreed to speak on one condition. Her name would not be used publicly. She lived right above me, Lorraine said, always left for class on time every morning. But one night, just one night, I heard heavy footsteps like someone dragging something. At first, she thought it might have been the cleaning crew. But after hearing Elizabeth had gone missing the very next day, she realized the noise had happened the night before, April 15th. And that raised a troubling question. If Elizabeth disappeared around noon on the 16th, why was something being dragged in her apartment the night before? Asked why she didn't report it sooner, Lorraine only said, "I've reported things before, another time. They didn't believe me." No one could verify what Lorraine heard, but her account prompted police to revisit the apartment's rental history. And that's when they discovered something unexpected. The unit had previously been rented by a man named Julio C., a Latino man with a minor criminal record. He had lived in that same room just a year before Elizabeth moved in. Building records showed that Julio had returned a few times to collect leftover belongings. No one knew if he still had a key. And then, a strange coincidence. Julio had once worked part-time at the very language center Elizabeth attended, doing basic audio-visual setup. His last day on the job? Just 3 days before Elizabeth disappeared. And then came the final detail, the one that transformed the case from a girl who vanished to someone cleaned the scene. When investigators followed up again with Amanda, the roommate, she revealed something she'd never told police before. That day, when I got home from work, there was a strong smell, like chlorine. I thought maybe someone had mopped the floor, but no one had hired a cleaner that day, and no one in the house used industrial-strength disinfectants. 3 years after Elizabeth vanished, her case had all but faded from public memory. No new leads, no confession, no movement on file. Her family returned to Mexico, but they never gave up. They hired a private investigator, a retired homicide detective from Salt Lake City. He started by going back to the very beginning, combing through every detail the police had missed. And he began with something small. The green SUV one classmate mentioned during the first week of the investigation. Working off a vague description of the make and color, the investigator pulled records for over 200 vehicles that matched in Provo at the time. But only one had parked near the Nomen Global Language Center more than 3 times in a single week, according to city traffic data. The owner? Julio C. The name was no longer unfamiliar. He had once lived in Elizabeth's apartment, had worked at her language school, and had been mentioned by neighbors. The investigator sent the information to Provo police, but Julio's file revealed something strange. He had left Utah just 1 week after Elizabeth disappeared. Since then, nothing. No new address, no job records, no bank activity, no tax filings. It was as if he too had vanished, at the exact same time Elizabeth did. The investigation shifted. The FBI was brought in, late, but just in time to activate a federal demographic tracing program used to track individuals who'd gone legally invisible. The results didn't come quickly, but in early 2018, 3 years after Elizabeth went missing, they got a match. Julio had changed his name. He was working under a new identity at a construction site in Arizona. An interview order was issued. Julio was brought in, not as a suspect, but as a relevant witness. When questioned, Julio denied everything. "I've never met Elizabeth. I left Utah for work. I don't know anything about that case." But when shown traffic images of his SUV, parked near Nomen Global on the week Elizabeth disappeared, he gave the same answer. "I don't remember. Maybe someone borrowed my car." Inside the Arizona police station, Julio sat across from 2 investigators. No handcuffs, no lawyer, just an informal chat, as they called it. "Did you ever go back to that apartment after moving out?" "No." "Did you know Elizabeth?" "No." "So why was your car near her school?" "I don't remember. Maybe I was buying something. I went there a lot." "You used to work at the school. Could it be coincidence?" "Could be." The conversation lasted 45 minutes. No confession, no inconsistencies, no emotion. But what shook the investigators wasn't what he said. It was his eyes. Julio never made eye contact. He didn't fidget, didn't get defensive. His gaze was either fixed on the floor or the wall. Not nervous, just blank. There wasn't enough to hold him. Julio walked out of that station like none of it ever happened. And to this day, he has never been charged with anything related to Elizabeth's case. Her family learned of the interview. At the press conference, they said nothing. But in a handwritten letter to Provo police, her father, Mr. Julio Sr., included just one line. "If you say he's not a suspect, then please tell me, who is?" And then came a question, this time not from the family, but from the private investigator himself. Why was there no blood? Why was there no DNA? Why was that room so clean? It looked like no one had ever lived there at all. He requested access to the original photos taken at the scene the day Elizabeth was reported missing. After weeks of delay, the police sent over a folder, 36 images showing every corner of the apartment. And that's when he saw it. In the photo of the nightstand, where police claimed they didn't see the phone, there was a faint glint of light at the edge of the drawer, a reflection, just enough to suggest the drawer wasn't fully closed, a tiny detail, but enough to reopen a much bigger question. Did the police really check every corner? Or had someone, from the very beginning, already rearranged the room before they arrived? Spring 2019, 4 years after Elizabeth's disappearance, investigators gathered behind closed doors at the Utah County Sheriff's Office. On the table were 4 case files, one for Julio C., one for Amanda, her roommate, one for the Brazilian student who quietly vanished, and one for Elizabeth herself. A young officer, newly assigned to the case, asked a question that sounded almost foolish. What if we've been wrong from the start? It was a suggestion no one wanted to hear, but slowly it led them to confront an uncomfortable truth. Every original theory, abduction, runaway, accident, lacked hard evidence. There was no blood, no foreign DNA, no consistent witness statements, no camera footage. Each lead, the backpack, the phone, the red journal, led nowhere. And even now, they still couldn't confirm when Elizabeth actually disappeared. Did she really leave class at 1:30 p.m.? Or did she go somewhere first, meet someone, before vanishing? And then came a possibility that had once been dismissed for sounding too absurd. What if she never left the school at all? The team began reviewing attendance logs and internal cameras. That's when they found it. An 18-minute gap in surveillance footage from 1:26 to 1:44 p.m. The school's tech coordinator said it was a camera glitch. But when the server was examined, they found the footage had been overwritten. Exactly 2 days later, there was no way to recover it. At the same time, something previously labeled as unrelated began to raise questions. A white utility van had been parked in front of the school, captured on footage from a convenience store 2 blocks away. The van sat there for nearly 40 minutes and left at the exact time Elizabeth was believed to have exited the school. The license plate was blurry, the driver unknown, and police had never traced the vehicle, not in the first 3 years. Once again, trust in the investigation began to crack. Elizabeth's family asked publicly, "Is someone hiding something? Or did they never truly want to find the answer?" And then a new clue appeared. Bizarre, unexplainable, and found in a place no one expected. April 2018, 3 years to the day after Elizabeth disappeared. A group of college campers from Salt Lake City pitched tents for the night in Hobble Creek Canyon, a remote mountain area nearly 30 miles from Provo. The woods were dense, phone signal gone. The next morning, one of the campers walked to a nearby stream to fetch water and saw something strange beneath an old tree, a silver necklace, thin, half-buried in dry soil, speckled with mud. She picked it up. On the pendant were 2 engraved words in Spanish, "Siempre contigo," always with you. She had no idea what it meant, but kept it anyway. Back in the city, one camper, a linguistics major, recognized the phrase. Elizabeth had used that same line in a class essay years earlier. Police were called. They returned to the site. And beneath the earth near that tree, they found a portion of human remains. DNA confirmed it. Elizabeth Elena Laguna-Salgado. Her body had decomposed almost entirely. No soft tissue. No signs of trauma. No clothes. No bag. Nothing. Except that necklace. The location wasn't easy to stumble upon. You had to hike at least an hour from the nearest road, through rocky slopes and dense brush. Police believed her body had been placed there days or even weeks after she died. But the most chilling detail wasn't in the burial itself. It was in how the necklace was left. It wasn't buried, not tangled in roots, not covered by leaves. It was just sitting there, as if someone had returned to the site and left it on purpose, which raised the terrifying question: who did that? Why after 3 years? And for what reason? A grim theory emerged. The person responsible is still watching, still nearby, and still wants to control the story. If they came back once, is it possible they never really left? 3 years after Elizabeth disappeared, her body was found in the woods. But the strangest part, no one was arrested. No one was charged. No one was ever brought back in for questioning. The case file was quietly reclassified as open but inactive. Open but with no active investigation. The reason? There simply wasn't enough evidence to accuse anyone. Elizabeth's family flew to Utah one final time, this time to bring her ashes home to Mexico. At a small memorial service in a local church, her father stood silently, staring at a framed photo. Elizabeth smiling in her student uniform, hair neatly tied back, books in hand. None of the people who once lived with her, studied with her, or worked at her school walked through the church doors that day. No apologies, no explanations. And to this day, no one can say what really happened on the afternoon of April 16, 2015, on that short walk, less than a kilometer, from her classroom to her apartment. No cameras, no witnesses, no clues, only the wind and silence. Elizabeth's red journal was never found. It might still be somewhere out in the mountains, or perhaps someone kept it as a trophy or as a memory they couldn't let go. And the silver necklace, siempre contigo, it wasn't placed there by weather or animals. It was left by someone who wanted it to be found. A late message? A whisper from whoever was responsible? Or Elizabeth's final plea for someone to uncover the truth? No one knows. This case has no killer, no witness, no answers. Only one thing remains: the sense that someone knows. And that someone is still out there,